is my belief that the single greatest predictor of success in the way that is the way we are having or not having conversations. And if we can learn to be more intentional about how we invite, genuinely invite, how we cultivate, and then how we participate, and then also facilitate conversations, that I believe there will not be any challenge that we're facing in an organization that we can't skillfully navigate to a productive and effective outcome. So if you grab a sheet of paper, here's something that I want you to write down, which is, what is the most, use your adjective, complex, difficult, gnarly, wicked problem that you feel like you're currently facing in your team or organization right now. So just grab a sheet of paper, make some notes about what that is. If you want, you're welcome to type it in chat and share. If you'd rather not, you can keep it to yourself. But I want you to just really get connected to this concept of problems, and really challenging problems, the ones that there's certainly no lack of them likely in the age of 2020, navigating global pandemics. And as you think about what you've written down, what I want you to also think about is this hypothesis of, what if the solution to the challenge that you're currently facing already exists? And even better, it does not require you to buy a product, a new tool, write a new process, hire a consultant, hire lawyers to create policies, like none of that, that the solution to it actually exists within the conversations. And what I like to call collective intelligence. So collective intelligence is this idea that new knowledge, insights, and thinking actually grows out of the collective, and the new thinking didn't exist at the individual level, and it really didn't exist prior to the conversation. So in this way of creating conversations for collective intelligence, it's about generative ideas that form from the conversations themselves. So here's the next challenge. But what if the conversations that we have are stuck or ineffective? Or what if in our organization, conversation is just really polite? It's about exchanging pleasantries, and we have the real conversation offline. Or what if conversations are used as a means to punish people for mistakes that are made? Or what if instead of being asked for your input, you're told what to think? What if conversations are a way to demonstrate value or importance in the organization? In other words, you get rewarded for putting forward ideas or being the smartest person in the room. And what if they're about creating, instead of asking for different perspectives, they're just a way to share what you already know? Or what if your attempts to share your perspective aren't welcomed, and they actually get you uninvited to future conversations about the same topic? So I believe that this is the pattern that happens in organizations today. And all of that, the mindset, the thinking, and then our behaviors in the moment, are the things that prevent us, that block collective intelligence. So 20 years ago, I could have answered yes to pretty much every one of those questions. Some of them I was on the receiving end of, and to be honest, some of them I was doing, not consciously. I didn't have it as a clear intention that I wanted to do that, but it was definitely an impact that I was having. And here's something I want you to know about me. One of the greatest gifts I've discovered in the past 15 years is the gift of self-awareness and other awareness. And I've come to know that the work of awareness is the work to do. As simple as that might seem, it is the process of becoming more aware. And in that process, I'm able to make different choices in the moment. And that this is where change happens. It's where behavior change takes place. So a lot of times we talk about awareness precedes choice, precedes change. And this is the work to do. So today, I'm an executive coach, and I coach leaders and leadership teams in this, in accessing their collective intelligence. And I believe that one of the greatest jobs of leaders today is to engage in conversations that foster collective intelligence and help cultivate a culture of that in the organization. Because I have seen and witnessed firsthand leadership teams that have dramatically changed the nature of conversations and created a palpable culture shift in their organization. So, if we're going to talk about conversations, though, we first need to understand a bit more about them and specifically what makes and fosters collective intelligence in a conversation. And in my experience, I think conversations, like people think, well, we have them every day, right? What in the world do we need to dive in and understand? And actually, I think we exchange words every day, but I don't think that we often have conversations. And so let's look at this metaphorically. So this comes from the work of Bill Isaacs. And I love how he talks about metaphors for being on this scale from monologue to dialogue. So monologue is this single voice. It's turn taking. It's like, I'm going to say what I want to say, then you go, and then someone else goes next. And it has a feeling of just kind of downloading. Like, I'm going to give you all this information. And then there's debate. So I'm located in Maryland, just outside of Washington, D.C. in the United States. If you're paying attention to any news outlet, probably anywhere in the world, you'll know we're about 4 days away in the US from a presidential election. And it feels like one of the things that we're collectively doing really well right now is debate. It's advocacy. It is believing that there will be a winner and a loser, and really holding strongly to a point of view, and quite frankly, being unwilling to be swayed in any part of the conversation. The metaphor is like a beating down of something. And what happens in debate is, like, the job is to influence, convince, persuade, or cajole. But that's the process of debate. And then the next one is discussion, and discussion actually means to break things apart. And in discussion, it can feel a bit like table tennis, where you're sort of lobbing a ball back and forth. Then we get to skillful conversation, and this is the first place where we shift from thinking about sides to take, and we begin looking in the conversation as we begin looking at the conversation as something to create. So the metaphor here is kind of that of plowing a field, where you're starting to dig under the surface. And in that, you discover new things. Inquiry is present here. So while there will also be advocacy, there is more inquiry than what you have in the others. And we stay with something long enough to understand the thinking behind it. So here is the first place that conversation actually comes forward, and it begins to shift the nature of what's happening. And then dialogue is the art of creating a shared pool of meaning. So this is really the place of generative conversation, where ideas are put into sort of this pool of water, and from that pool of water, new ideas emerge. And this is why I think we do very little conversation. I think we tend to hang out down in the other parts of this model in our conversations. So I have a challenge for each of us, and this is including myself. And in coaching, when someone offers you a challenge, you get to accept, reject, or counter offer. So you can do that silently. You can decide whether you're opting in or out. But here's what I want for all of us, and that is to be able to foster more collective intelligence in our conversations tomorrow than we do today. And this is not about major change. This is about small, micro moment habits that shift thinking and perspective in order to change the nature of something of what's happening. So if you're willing to accept this challenge, you can either give me a thumbs up in the video, or you can do a thumbs up in chat. Thanks, I see, awesome. I see familiar faces on here too. It's nice to see you. And here's what we're gonna do. So I'm gonna talk today about 3 things that you can do that will help you in this process of changing the nature. So one is to set your intention. So are you aiming for monologue or dialogue? And that's what we just talked about. Sometimes monologue will be necessary, or it's just what's called for. It's fine, it's not wrong. It is though if we hang out there all day, every day. So where are the places that you might aim for monologue and where might you aim for dialogue? And next we're going to talk about either bring or invite all 4 actions into a conversation. And the third is to cultivate the space for dialogue. So let's dive in. All right. The first part of this is structure of conversations. So I find this fascinating. Conversations have a structure, and it is the structure of them that determines the performance or outcome. Every sentence we say can be coded into one of 4 actions. And what makes conversations effective is when we are able to voice all 4 of these actions by anybody in the conversation fluently. And when we're able to do that, we are moving towards more skillful conversation or dialogue. And when we're not able to do that, we stay down in monologue, discussion, and debate. So I want to walk you through these real quickly. And it's a fairly simple model, but it has lots of application, as we'll see as we go. So the first one is move. So move sets direction in a conversation. It sort of points, let's go this way in the conversation. A follow supports the move or might support the oppose, but it provides alignment, agreement. And without follow, there's no completion to things that get put forward in a conversation. The third one is oppose. So oppose says, hold on, wait a minute, don't run off the tracks yet. And it offers correction. It also offers different perspective in a conversation. And then the fourth one is bystand. And bystand is a morally neutral comment on what's happening. So it is not opposing or following. It is genuinely morally neutral. And it's naming or inquiring. So a bystand might be, I notice it's cloudy out today, or I notice there's 2 people participating in the conversation right now. But it does so without judgment. So move and oppose are on the line of advocacy. So when you're in more monologue and discussion, you will find more move and oppose as the actions. Follow and bystand bring inquiry. They bring question and support. They carry forward something. So when you hear follow and bystand, you'll have more inquiry. The goal is that we need both. We need both advocacy and inquiry. So grab that sheet of paper that you've got, maybe, and here's a quick test. Not really, just a practice. Here's a sentence, a group of sentences, and we're going to talk about coffee because I have coffee and it's in the morning where I'm at. So this is the conversation. So I want you to practice coding it real quickly, and you can just jot it down on your sheet of paper. So let's meet for coffee next week. That's either a move, follow, oppose, or bystand. Just take a guess. Next week is out for me. What about the following week? Yes, that works for me. Where would you like to go? Let's go to the new shop on the corner. So for each one of those, move, follow, oppose, or bystand. Now let's see how you did. So let's meet for coffee next week. That's direction in the conversation. It's a move. Next week is out for me. That's the oppose. It offers, hold on, stop. What about the following week is a move? Yes, that works for me. It's a follow, it supports. Where would you like to go as a bystand? There's no judgment or persuasion in that comment. It's just genuine curiosity. And then let's go to the next, let's go to the new shop on the corner, new move. So in skillful conversations, we need dialogue and all four of these actions. And in order for the conversation to be effective, we need to be able to hear all four of them. So it seems pretty simple and straightforward, right? We can all do those actions, we'll be pretty good to go. Except it's this question about, so then why aren't we able to? And I find that endlessly fascinating. So I've been doing this work for years. I work with many teams down at the team level, at the executive level, and I'm fascinated to watch over and over patterns play out where when one or more of those actions are missing, it becomes a blocker to the team, it becomes a blocker to the team being able to move forward, and it definitely becomes a blocker to skillful conversation. So one of the problems that is often present is there will be one or more of those actions that is missing. And it's often that a pose is one of the primary ones that's missing. And some of that could be cultural. I certainly work here in the US, and I believe that there are other cultures that might have slightly different patterns that show up predominantly. But let's look at a couple of them. So the first one is serial moving. And you'll know that you've been in a conversation where serial moving is happening. It's where a lot of move is on the table. So somebody puts a move out, another person puts a move out. Hey, I think we should talk about that report that we were working on last week. What about the Zoom information? Did you get that cleared away? Or what about this other thing that we needed to talk about for next week? So the pattern in those conversations, there'll be lots of energy. And you'll leave them going, what did we do? I mean, did we actually get something done, or did we just put a lot of stuff on the table? And here's a couple of things about mindset that is often underneath serial moving. So just listen and see if any of these resonate for you. Sometimes there's thinking that my value is demonstrated when I'm able to put forth ideas. If I were to remain silent, I might not be valued. I need to keep the conversation moving because silence is really uncomfortable for me and not productive. Or the more ideas we have, the more progress we'll make. Or I'm the leader, I make the moves. It's my job. Or I'm not sure that the group can handle this topic, so I'm just going to keep putting new things out. And another one, and this is the tricky one, is that I don't like what I just heard, but I don't feel safe telling you that, so I'm just going to change the topic and put out a new topic. And that's where the pattern of serial moving starts to show up. And those are some of the internal narratives that create that kind of behavior in the moment. So here's another one, courteous compliance. And this is where you'll hear a move and then you'll hear lots to follow. Sounds good to me, sure, let's do it. And here's the mindset here. Sometimes it can be, well, just tell me what you want me to do and I'll do it. I've tried offering a different point of view before and it's not valued, so let's just move on. Or my role is to follow. It's not my role to do anything else. Or can't we just get along and move forward? Like, I don't really want to rock the boat. And I feel like if I say anything else, it's just going to drag this conversation out that much further. And I just don't want to. So let's go. I'm okay. Thumbs up. So that's some of the mindset and thinking that can happen underneath courteous compliance. The next one is point counterpoint. And this is very clearly debate. So this is advocacy. There's one point of view, there's another point of view, and neither are moving. I think we should do it this way. I disagree. I think it should happen this way. And some of the thinking that happens underneath that is just, I don't feel heard. I feel like every time I say something, nobody listens, so I'm just going to dig in and say it louder. Or I don't think they understand. Let me try a different way of saying that, or let me see if I can convince or help them understand a lot more about what's happening. So it becomes really entrenched about what's happening in the conversation. And here's the fourth pattern, which is covert opposition. And I really do believe that in many organizations, what's happened is somehow oppose, like a really clear, effective oppose, has somewhat been trained out of us. People believe that I hear this all the time, it's not my role, or it's not welcomed, or that would be a career limiting move, and we just need to get this done. So what we do instead of offering the oppose is we make a bystand, or we make a move, or we make a follow. And what will be different about this is, and you won't really know unless you ask the person what they were saying or what was their intent, but sometimes it's a genuine move because I want to introduce a new topic. And sometimes it's a covert oppose, meaning my intent is to oppose, but the action I'm going to take in the room is actually a move. And when there is dissonance between your intent and your action, it's partly what creates the stuck conversations. And it's where conversations, and particularly new thinking, actually go offline rather than coming online. They go out of the room, they go to the Slack channel, they go to the one-on-one coffee, they go anywhere but online in the conversation. And when these actions are missing, one of the jobs of any of us, regardless of role, is to be able to bring them in ourselves or invite them from someone else. So one way you can do this is asking for a bystand. So in the serial moving, a bystand would be really helpful there. So you might just say, what's happening in the conversation right now? Or I notice we have 4 moves on the table. Which one would we like to focus on? Or if there's a pose missing, for you to prompt for it. So where might I be wrong? Or who sees this differently? Or what are the risks that we're facing right now? Or if you feel like there's a lack of move in the conversation, ask someone, what suggestion would you make? Rather than needing to be the one that puts it forward all the time. Or if you feel like follow is missing, which will be one of the things missing in advocacy, ask somebody, like, what are you hearing that you're aligned with? Or what's something, even if it's 1 or 2% about what the other one is saying, that you agree with? The invisible stories that sit underneath of our conversations are they play a big role in what derails them. And sometimes we just need the ability to slow it down just enough so that we can see these actions and then help others see them in the conversation. And we can craft new internal narratives for ourselves. Things like, instead of believing that it's not my role or that we need to just keep moving, to believe that we need everyone's voice. And it's important for me to say what I believe is true, and then to inquire of others and ask genuine questions, or to suspend the belief that I'm right and respect different points of view that are not like mine, and to be curious about them. And to see these actions as available to everybody, not just determined by a role or a position that we hold. So back to our challenge, set your intention, is it monologue or dialogue? And then bring all 4 actions into the conversation. And so last I want to chat about, just for a few minutes, about this concept of cultivating the space for dialogue and to be really intentional about it. So one of the goals of Agile is individuals and interactions over processes and tools. And yet I would love for someone to help me understand, or how we explain. We've been doing this for 13, 14 years. The version 1 CollabNet puts out this State of the Agile survey each year. And I'm waiting, really, I look at it every year. I'm waiting for the year where there's one that does not show company culture and lack of management support and general resistance to change as something other than the top 3 reasons why their challenges are experienced in adopting Agile. I'm hopeful and I'm waiting with bated breath. And I think that HBR, Harvard Business Review, summed it up really well. This article came out back in, I think it was 2016. And I love what they said. Agile has revolutionized the software industry, and it's it's poised to transform nearly every other function in the industry. And at this point, the greatest impediment is not the need for better methodologies, evidence benefits, any of that. It is the behavior of executives. And in 2020, I think we have experienced collective disruption like never before. The Business Agility Institute now publishes a state of business agility, and their report this year just came out. And they too show some of the top challenges that we're facing as leadership style, mindset, and silos. And leadership mindset and behavior being one of the biggest challenges to business agility. And partly it's because they're noticing and finding that leaders continue to use leadership styles and behaviors that are consistent with legacy culture and not with the new culture that the organization is desiring. So it creates this dissonance for people and sends mixed messages to them about what's being asked for. So engaging in dialogue, which is somewhat different, is a core mindset shift and behavior change to lead effective change. And it becomes a belief that human beings create, refine, and share knowledge through conversations. It's how culture is created. It's how we create change in organizations. And I hold that it's the most important activity of leaders, especially in the context of agility, to be creating the environment that supports dialogue and less monologue and debate. And I think that requires a fundamentally different thinking in how we show up and engage in conversations. And it's the approach that leaders really need to take if they want to cultivate the change that I believe they're genuinely seeking. I want to share a story to illustrate this, because I think the concept of dialogue is sometimes a little hard to wrap your head around. So this is two true stories, and it's great because they were happening at about the same time. So Company A and Company B were both experiencing what I call a front page crisis. And this is where the executive team gets feedback from their organization via the media on the front page of a paper. Got it? So front page crisis happening in both organizations. And obviously, it induces high stakes throughout the organization, and certainly for an executive team, and it causes a great deal of disruption. So executives in both of these companies were feeling at that moment called out, blindsided, and is often the case in something like that. One side of the story is being played out very publicly and great drama over the media, and other sides of the story remain behind the scenes, somewhat untold. And also, for the story to have made its way all the way to the press, there is a great deal of frustration in the organization. So people don't feel heard, they don't feel valued, and there's a belief that a moral crime has been committed by the organization or by the executive team. And that's pretty much where the similarities of these two stories end, because what I want to highlight for you are the different actions and the approach that they both took. So Company A took action. They publicly took responsibility for what was happening, declined any further comment, and noted that they were turning internally to listen. Company B took action, but it was different. They publicly defended their position and explained why the issue had happened. So the executives of Company A began to hold listening sessions in small groups across the company. So executives went through this process of clearing their calendar, creating small focus groups. They wanted to hear firsthand. They didn't want it sorted through them for different filters. They went right to the conversation. Company B, on the other hand, hired a consultant, a mediator, and a legal team. No kidding. And started to draft policies and processes to fix what they believed was the problem that had created the mess in the first place. Now that might sound great because it got something done, right? It took action pretty quickly. But what it ultimately ended up doing was keeping the organization stuck in the same dysfunctional pattern that had created the crisis in the first place. It was very top-down. and chances of them having another high stakes moment like that are pretty high. Company A has continued their internal transformation. It's been a pretty long process, and they have taken a very dialogic approach to it. And they have shifted over time. The culture has shifted. The leadership team has taken ownership for it. They have been doing their own work to change the nature of the conversation that's happening at the leadership team. And they are also beginning to tell different stories in the organization. And there's a different sense of understanding in the company A, because there's a different shared understanding about what's needed. Company B has returned to their old behaviors. There's a lot of monologue, a lot of downloading from the executive team, and filling in their minds what they believe is the role expected of leaders. And yet both sides, employees and executives, still feel greatly misunderstood and somewhat deflated. So the moral here is that a dialogic approach to change, I believe, is the foundation for increasing agility and to creating this generative change that truly cultivates agile organizations. And it's less about what happens to you, and it's more about how you choose to respond to it. And I believe it's a clarion call for not burying your head in the sand, regardless of whatever level of an organization you work at, and thinking about how you can take a dialogic approach to something rather than a monologue, and changing the way we think together. So how do you start to work on this in a way that makes it accessible? It's simple, but I don't believe it's easy at all. And I think it requires getting uncomfortable with being uncomfortable, or getting comfortable with being uncomfortable. And it starts with the ability to make this conscious choice in the moment when something happens that says, what kind of leadership is needed from me in this moment right now? And being able to choose to stay in the breakdown in order to move to a greater space where new thinking and actually thinking together can emerge. And so a couple of things to think about as you contemplate how you might put some of this into action. When you find yourself in a crisis of whatever kind it means, how can you stay in the breakdown? Meaning, how can you structurally, what's happening, if you think about either of those examples, structurally what's happened is the organization has opposed greatly. So how do you follow the oppose? So company B did not follow the oppose. They just made new moves. They said, we're going to do this, and then we're going to do this. Company B sat down and said, hey, tell me about your perspective. What's challenging here right now? So structurally, they created follow to the oppose. That's not, that takes thought. That takes intentionality and the willingness to be uncomfortable with something. If you stay in the breakdown and you're able to model practices of listening and respecting different ideas, suspending judgment or that you've got the answer, and then also voicing your truth, choosing a path to dialogue and a dialogic style of leadership, I think is the place where you start to tap into collective intelligence. If you turn away from it or try to fix it, I think you're just going to create more of the same. So stay in the breakdown, create the space for opposition, listen and inquire rather than believe that you've got an answer or have the thing that you know you need to solve. Like, it's truly about understanding at a different level. And then also be authentic and vulnerable. It does not repel others, regardless of, I think there's old leadership thinking in that for me to show up as my real self, then people won't want that. I think the pandemic has challenged that a little bit, which is kind of nice to see. And the last one is creating space and going first. You can't expect people to speak their mind always. And I believe creating space means you model what it looks like and you create the opportunities or you ask the questions. It does not spontaneously appear anywhere, and hoping for it won't get you there. And speaking practically, even from my own experience, I think that I'm a pretty open person, and I am often asking for and creating space for that. And I will tell you that I've been stumped myself about ways that I haven't done that. So if you're thinking that, well, I'm pretty open and I ask for those things, I would invite you to test it, because I have learned that just when you think you are, chances are there are places where you're not. And I think the other key to this is that we have to believe that conversations are our highest and most effective work that we can be doing in an organization if we're trying to create change, and certainly working towards something that's more agile and sustainable. I love this quote by Margaret Wheatley. She says, "Human conversation is the most ancient and easiest way to cultivate the conditions for change, personal, community, organizational. And yet we're quite unskillful with it sometimes." And I think that in order to lead change, we need that behavioral and conversational lens to take more of a front seat rather than having it take a back seat to all the tools and frameworks and processes and things that I think just overshadow it sometimes. And they become less of a focus. So I have a dream. My highest dream is that we are all collectively challenging the way organizations engage in the art of conversation and collaboration. I have had the honor over the last 20 years of teaching facilitation and coaching skills to Agile leaders, and I will tell you I have a vision way beyond just training people to be facilitators and coaches, because I imagine like what would it be like if dialogue, if taking that approach to dialogue and collaboration were a norm for how we think together about the dilemmas we face. I think that would shift the pattern of what's happening in our organizations dramatically. I can tell you in my executive coaching practice, this thought occurred to me a couple of months ago as I was working with both individual leaders and then the team itself. The people that show up in one-on-one coaching conversations are often different than the people that show up in that executive team room or that board meeting. And I so wish that for the day where that person that shows up in the one-on-one conversation is the same person that shows up in that team. And I've watched teams do this. I have watched leaders make that leap and bring their whole selves forward. And the day that that starts to happen as a norm, I promise you we're going to move on to solving something else, because the problems of how we navigate big change and collaboration, and what does that look like, and what is agility, and what does business agility look like, I think we will move to a different conversation, because they will be able to have the conversation, collective intelligence comes forward, and they're able to solve things and respond to them in that moment. So I want to leave you with this, which is the question of, how will you foster a more collective intelligence tomorrow? What's one small thing you could do to shift the conversation from being more dialogue, less monologue? Where's a place that you'd be willing to dare to say something, or dare to even inquire of someone else? And with that, this is a book that I have coming out in January, and some of what I'm talking about today is in there. And you can download the first chapter for free. So if you go to artandscienceoffacilitation.com, you can download. Yeah. So that's all. So we can open it up to questions.
Yes, so maybe you can unshare, and we'll try to copy that link to the chat maybe for people.
Great.
Later on. So I have one question here for you, which is about executives. So from Maya, and what are some practical tips you can share with us to persuade the executives in our organization to adapt a more open culture where dialogues can thrive?
Ah, I love it. I love this notion of persuading. So here, I'd ask you to reframe it, which is to think about how, instead of persuading, how you'd engage in a dialogue and create space. There's a organization that I was working with that they have this fantastic example of what was happening. So there was an Agile team that was, they do sort of assessments quarterly, and they were assessing sort of agility. And one of the things that kept coming up in their scores time and time again was leadership is the number one problem. So our tendency is to want to take the results and go, see this, you here are the problem. How are you going to help me fix this? And I think that's a very monologic approach, and it's filled with a lot of blame. And I think if you flip that around to thinking about those executives will be dealing with their own challenges. I will tell you, many of them today have the weight of the world on their shoulders. And they also have an old belief that they have to have all the answers. So in this particular team, they took the results to the executive with an invitation to come and join a conversation with them. And they told the executive, please don't come with any answers or solutions. All we want you to do is come listen. So that one request with the permission to not have to solve something shifted the whole nature of the conversation that team was having. So they had that conversation. They then began to have more. The executive was actually interested in wanting to come because it's hard. Like, think about when you're being told you're the problem. If I'm getting that feedback, I don't understand. There's such a gap for me between what's creating that result and then what I'm doing that's creating that. So again, I think conversations create a space to bridge that, but people have to be given permission not to come with a solution, actually to believe that the solution will come out of that. So about a year later, the whole results of those surveys began to change because leaders were more involved in it. So that's a quick way.
Nice, thanks. Now I have another one from Anastasia. She's looking into cross-cultural aspect, right? Behind the covert opposition, and that open opposition might be impossible due to cultural norms. So do you have any thoughts around this?
Yeah. I would not claim to be an expert in other cultures, other than I would bring it back to, I think that's true. I think there's some cultures where opposition is more the norm than if I compare that to what we have, I believe, here in the States. And it's not, I'm generalizing, which probably isn't a great thing to do, but I think there's some cultures where it comes out more cleanly and is more part of the norms. And I think there are other cultures where it's just not. it's far from the norm. And I think there's an opportunity there to, again, talk about, so what is it like to oppose someone here? What makes it not okay? And maybe if we can't actually oppose, the place to start is to have a conversation about what it would be like to do that. And potentially, I think the ideas for how people in that space navigate that, maybe there are ways they could do more writing or more written feedback versus speaking, or more collective ways to pull out collective intelligence that don't totally send someone sort of off the charts into high stakes because they're being asked to do something that just is ingrained. It's like in the DNA of how we operate. So,
what was the most difficult for you on your journey when you can sort of realized that you need to give more space or cultivate space for dialogue, right? So what was the most difficult for you?
I have two things. So one is there's a whole list. One is I used to think like, why, what is it with conversation? Like, we all do it. Can we just move on? Like, what is the big whoop about conversation? So I marginalized it for years. I was much more interested in the tools that I could grab. I've been facilitating, I came to facilitation way before I came to coaching. So I was all about the sticky notes and the dot votes and the boards and the things that we move things around on. And I paid way more attention to the things than I did to the relationships and the conversation. So learning for me, and the moments, I can tell you where some of them were. I remember being in a room one time when the conversation, I wasn't facilitating, I was part of it. And there was such a profound breakdown between two people in that moment. The stakes went up, they were sort of at one another, and I have my own relationship to oppose. So not only did I want to leave the room via a trap door somewhere, I also watched in that moment the person who was facilitating. We actually, whereas if I had been in charge, we'd have pushed that off and kept moving to what we were supposed to be talking about. And what I watched was how we stayed with that. Super uncomfortable. Like I said, I wanted the trap door. I couldn't believe what people were saying to each other, like out in the open. And I think that was such a profound moment for me. And I took away a couple of things from it. One was, sometimes it's important enough to stay with something that feels like it's off topic because it's actually the topic. Slowing down enough to pay attention to the conversation gave us as a group, it built our muscle in being able to be with conflict, being able to be with opposition, and being able to hear the real thing that needed to be said. And I think it was in that moment where I was like, holy cow, this is the work. All that, it's not that all that stuff that I've been doing isn't valuable, but it's for me, everything sort of took a fundamental shift in where I put priority and emphasis. So.
Oh, thanks for sharing.
Yeah.
I have a different topic here from JY about, he said that leaders should listen first, right? But when someone is sharing a problem with a leader, it is because he wants him or her to solve it. What should leaders do then?
I think it takes, for me, what comes up without knowing any particular situation is, I think sometimes that thinking, potentially it's something that someone can solve, like, I need you to fund this and I need 20K or 20 euros to do it. I think there are times though where the thing that we're asking, that we think we want solution to, isn't quite thoroughly thought out enough. So we're solving for something when we don't really quite fully understand what we're solving for. And I still think it's the opportunity for, if you were to, so if you've got something and you say, hey, person, I need you to solve this for me, what would it be like to stay in that and be a conversation enough to surface what might potentially be underneath of it? So you'll have your perspective if you can bystand and say, here's what I'm seeing, here's what I notice, here are the things that are happening. And then also to inquire of the person that you're asking from. So what do you see? What do you notice? What's going on for you? What do you have perspective on that I don't? Because both of you will come into it with totally different perspectives about what's happening. And then to actually, inquire and ask. And chances are there will be some new piece of data or information that comes out of that could potentially shift thinking. And if it doesn't, then great. You're asking for the thing that you need solved. But I still look at it from the perspective of how can you change it from just a straightforward ask or solutioning to, how could we make a conversation here or create a conversation?
Cool. So now, can you share, we have like 2 more minutes, so some story about something which, where did you learn the most about this whole thing, maybe?
Mm. What have I learned? So I'll share briefly. I said a moment ago I had done my own work on that. One of the things that I have done the most work on, and that has probably shifted the most for me, and still not done, is voicing opposition. So I was unaware, I think, of how often or really what my relationship is to oppose. And some of that comes from how I grew up. I was taught to be polite and nice, and that looked like saying yes, don't rock the boat. Opposition can be rude. So those are some of my internal narratives that I carried around about opposition. And so when I would be in a room where I didn't like something or I disagreed with it, I would be silent. And it was very hard for me. So the work that I have done, and actually the model that I shared that comes from David Cantor in structural dynamics, is to look at and see a more systemic view of conversation and how I was contributing to a lot of the breakdown when I didn't voice it. So knowing that move, follow, oppose, and bystand were all needed, and that I needed to also be able to bring all of those, I think dramatically it changed for me not only how I show up, but it really shifted my perspective on conflict in general. So I now look at conflict as, like, when I'm hearing opposition, I get excited, which is a shift from wanting the trap door in the room to open up and take my chair and me with it, to I actually get excited because I go, awesome, like it's here. And I know that when it's here, if we stay with it, like different thinking will emerge. But it's when it's not here that it's sometimes much harder to bring it forward. So.
Cool. So last thing, if there is one thing you want people to remember from today, what it is?
Dialogue versus monologue. How can it be a conversation versus telling, or a conversation versus asking, or a conversation versus blaming or pointing fingers? I think that's our mental shift to make. And I think that's true of across the organization. So regardless of your role, if you're an executive, how can you create more space and ask for it? How can you resist the need to bring or actually design with people not to have the solutions? If you're looking up to executives going, you're the problem, how can you find empathy and inquire about what's happening for them? How can you make them part of the solution? So, yeah.
Thank you very much. It was
Thanks.
really great to listen to all that first time.